Okay, so in this video I'm just going to show my setup that I've got for making the character jump. Um, it's something that I've mentioned in a previous video, that I've looked at it a little bit, but I haven't really implemented anything, and I didn't really get a solution that at that point in time um, really worked. And okay, so let me just jump in straight away. So the reason why the jump is so difficult to get it right is um, because of the set velocity, and I had a it took me a while to actually just figure out exactly what's going on and exactly why certain things are happening with the jump. And pretty much it all boils down to the fact that when you use set velocity, you set all axes, um, whatever amount you give it. So as I've mentioned before, I use the set velocity and I use the um, relative rotation, and so that allows me to make the character run on X all the time. So that works perfectly. But what it also does is it also keeps setting Y to 0 and it also keeps setting Z to 0. And so ultimately my solution for that was when you run down something and you fall, and you keep running, so so um, so you don't end up running in the air. I had a negative Z, and the reason why that became a problem is pretty much the fact that when I set the velocity, I use a repeat trigger, so it keeps triggering this little bit here over and over and over, while you hold down the button. And the reason why I had to do that was because on the keyboard it's different than on a joystick. On a joystick you can only ever run in one direction at a time. You know, you can't move your joystick in two different directions at once. So it's a completely different thing. With the keyboard you can push two or three buttons at the same time, and to make that work, I have this system which I've shown in a previous video, and to make that system work properly, I have to use the repeat, so that when you hold down one button and then you hold down a second button while you're holding down the first one, and then let go of either one, you want the character to actually move in that direction that you're currently holding down, and that's why you need the repeat. You can actually make the character run with this setup with a pressed event, but if you push the second key and you let go of the first key was still the one that you actually pressed, and the character will end up running in the wrong direction compared to the key that you're holding down. So, with all that said, that's basically the reason why I have so much trouble with the jump, because while you're running, you keep setting the Z velocity, and a real easy solution would have been if set velocity could have been broken down into channels. So if you could set X separately and Y separately and Z separately. The fact that you can't do that actually made this a bigger problem than it really needs to be. So um, let me just start over here. This is the sequence that I use for jumping, and it probably looks more complicated than it needs to be, but it's actually doing some fairly simple stuff. It's just, with Kismet, obviously, everything you do, you have a node for it, so it ultimately looks more complicated than it really is. Um, quickly, what I do is when you push jump, I use the same system as with my other stuff. I disable the key, so you can't just keep pushing jump, otherwise you'll keep going into the air endlessly and you'll basically fly. So I have to disable that key, so you can only jump once you've landed from your previous jump. So push jump, disable the key for that amount of time. Um, then what I do with this is the reason why I get the current velocity of the character is because I have to have two separate jump states basically. So all I'm doing here is I'm checking whether the character is moving or not. And so I'm checking against 0. So if it's 0, obviously the character is standing still. And if X or Y is moving in any direction, either positive or negative, the character is moving. So then, do something else. So if the character is standing still, then I do this. First thing I do is I disable uh, certain keys, which I'll show in the other sequence. And then set the physics to falling, which is the only, which is the way you can get the character to actually go into the air. And then I throw him into the air on Z. So that's pretty much that. So this is where the jump actually happens. It's in these two. So you set the physics to falling and then throw the character up in the air. Um, that's when you're standing still. So you jump straight up. While you're running, same thing. I disable the movement, set the physics to falling, but then I also throw the character on X. So I throw him up in the air and I throw him on X. So while you're running, you want to be able to jump forward, right? So that's what that is. So just to be able to get that, this stuff is required. And on this one, this is purely an animation thing I wanted to do because he's a ninja, he does somersaults, right? So um, at first I tried to implement the somersault directly into the animation tree in the jump setup, and that didn't really work out. So I've got a normal jump setup where he's got his falling animation and he's got his landing animation and he's got all that stuff. But for the somersault specifically, I blend that in using my uh, set active anim child. Um, so just like with the attack animations, I just call this animation when I jump, let it play, and then set it back to the normal animation. So this way the somersault does not interfere with normal, like if you're just running down, and falling off a ledge or something like that, the somersault isn't actually called, it's just normal falling animations and stuff like that. So it's just much more controllable, it blends better, it allows me to get the full animation in very nicely. It doesn't affect the character because in the animation tree you've got the setup for jumping, which is set up in the way that it's done for Unreal Tournament, and it's a really good setup. But it doesn't allow me to get a really clean somersault in there at any point on any jumping height of jumping off a ledge or jumping just on the floor or something like that. So long explanation for 3 notes. Okay, so next up, so that's where the jump happens, and this is this here is so I can control when the jump event basically is completed. So you jump, you leave the ground, and when you touch back down on the ground, some other stuff needs to happen, and this is where I control that. And originally I used a anim notify, a Kismet anim notify, and to detect whether the landing animation is playing, and then when the landing animation plays, this stuff happens. But I realized that there are instances where you can jump, like if you jump up something that's just a little too high or just barely high enough, the landing animation doesn't actually play, and so the event never gets called. So what I do instead is, again, I get the player velocity, I just get the Z and I compare it to 0 again, and um, so when the Z is 0, you're standing on the ground. So then the jumping sequence is complete, and this allows me to fall from any height and run this sequence. So all I'm doing is I'm setting the physics back to walking, because the jump is now complete, and I'm enabling the movement, the normal movement keys again, and I'm just doing a set velocity on the character to 0, so there's no residual velocity like stuff going on in the background. If you don't have this, then what will happen is um, the character might still be running or something like that, and if you get thrown into a direction with set velocity over here, that might still be in play, and so this is basically just a reset. Okay, so that's pretty much the jumping stuff. I'll in the next video I'll just quickly go over how my directional or movement controls are affected by this, and and then I'll also show another video, obviously, how the jump actually functions.